I caught my wife cheating on my hidden camera and kicked her out the same day. But now what do I do about her kids that I love? This is going to be a long one. I just needed to get it out. I'm a 52-year-old man who lost my first wife 10 years ago. At the time, I had 2 daughters, now 21 and 24. After about 3 years of grieving and trying to move forward, I met my current wife, who is now 38. We met in a way that felt almost like fate. We kept bumping into each other around town, at the grocery store, the gas station, even walking in the park. We'd sometimes make eye contact, smile, and point at each other in passing, but never spoke. Then, one day, while getting my car serviced, she walked into the waiting room as hers was being worked on too. We finally had a conversation. We ended up walking across the street to grab some decent coffee, as the service center's coffee was terrible. We talked for about an hour until my car was ready. Before I left, I asked if she'd like to meet for lunch sometime to continue our conversation. She agreed, and we exchanged numbers. We dated for 2 years before getting married. She had 2 boys, now 10 and 14, and they moved into my home after living with her parents for 3 years. My daughters adored her, not as a stepmom, but more like a big sister. Having another adult in the house with 2 teenage girls was a blessing. Life was good, really good. I loved those boys as if they were my own. The little one started calling me Dad, while the older one preferred to call me by my first name, which I was fine with. My daughters called my wife by her name, and it all worked. My wife became a stay-at-home mom, and we agreed she'd stay home until the kids were fully adjusted. Later, she decided she didn't want to return to work, though she kept busy volunteering at school and helping with activities. Over the years, my older daughter went off to college and recently graduated. My younger daughter just graduated high school this past weekend, and we're helping her move out soon. My wife told me her ex had abandoned her shortly after their second son was born and had been out of the picture ever since. Her parents were supportive but distant, especially her father, who held me at arm's length. He didn't like the idea of someone too old marrying his daughter. He'd often make snide comments when I was around, so I eventually decided to stay away from them, though I encouraged her to keep her relationship with them strong, since they lived only a few blocks away. Then, this past February, her ex reappeared, claiming he wanted to reconnect with his kids. I couldn't refuse that. It wasn't my place, but I set boundaries. He could only visit on weekends to avoid disrupting the kids' school schedule, and we tried to give him space when he was with them. As time went on, though, I noticed changes. My wife and I weren't as intimate anymore. She had the usual excuses. I started noticing small things around the house. My favorite snacks disappearing. Beers missing. I'm not a big drinker, but I'd have one occasionally. The biggest red flag was the faint smell of weed. When I asked my wife if she was smoking, she denied it, claiming neither she nor the kids would ever do that. I suggested we talk to the 14-year-old about it, but she said she'd handle it. Then, 2 weeks ago, my stepson asked me out of the blue if I loved his mom. Thinking he was asking for advice about a crush, I said yes, of course, but he followed up with, "Do you think she loves my dad?" Confused, I asked what he meant. He said he'd noticed they were always talking, laughing, and touching when his dad came over. He also mentioned his dad was at the house almost every day after school. That weekend, while his dad was over, I stayed in the living room to observe. He came in, grabbed a beer, and sat across from me. When I commented on it, he just shrugged. Then he looked me dead in the eye and said, "You know I'm only here for her, right?" I froze. He went on to say technically she's still my wife. We were never properly divorced. I knew that wasn't true. The divorce had been finalized years ago. But when I asked my wife about it later, she was evasive. That was when I installed a camera in the living room, hidden on top of the TV. It was motion activated, and I set it to notify me whenever it recorded movement. Last Wednesday, while at work, I got an alert. Curious, I checked the footage. It was him, coming into my house. My wife let him in and they kissed, a long, intimate kiss. He grabbed at her, and she playfully pushed him away, laughing. She brought him a beer and some snacks. Then she left the room, returning in fresh clothes before heading out to volunteer at the school. What I saw next shattered me. She gave him oral before leaving for school. He stayed behind, watching TV and napping on my couch. When I got another alert that afternoon, I saw them head to the bedroom together. I raced home and caught them. The confrontation was exactly what you'd expect. Screaming, pleading, excuses. She swore it was a one-time mistake, but the evidence said otherwise. I kicked her out that day. She begged to stay, blaming me for not being intimate enough. I called her father to come get her and sent him an edited video showing the betrayal. He called me back after seeing it, but I didn't answer. I've since contacted a lawyer and am moving forward with divorce. I'm heartbroken for the boys, especially the 14-year-old. I love them like they're my own and don't want them to suffer because of their parents' mistakes. Has anyone here been through something similar? How do you stay connected with kids who aren't biologically yours after a divorce? Thanks in advance for any advice. Update. Sorry if this update feels scattered. I've written and rewritten it countless times. Last week was a whirlwind. My daughter graduated, we moved her home, kids' sports kicked off, I met with a lawyer and had my first face-to-face with my wife since everything blew up. When I got home Sunday after moving my daughter's things, I parked the U-Haul in the driveway and began unpacking. That evening, my 14-year-old called me. Dad, what's going on? No one's talking to us. Mom and Grandma are crying. Grandpa's yelling. Is this because of what I told you? My heart broke. I reassured him, explaining that his mom made a bad mistake, but it wasn't his fault. He sounded relieved but still uneasy. Then he asked, are you packing up our stuff? I saw the U-Haul. I told him their things weren't going anywhere and explained the situation as best as I could for his age. The next few days were tough. Monday and Wednesday were sports nights, and as usual, I stood behind the backstop while the rest of the family sat in the bleachers. The oldest boy stopped his warm-up to jog over and hug me. We chatted for a bit before I sent him back to the field. Moments later, his younger brother sprinted across the field and tackled me with a hug. As I stood there, my father-in-law approached. He asked if we could talk. We stepped away, and to my surprise, he apologized for how he'd treated me in the past. I was wrong, he admitted. Though it was long overdue, I accepted his apology. He even invited me to sit with the family, but I declined. Then he asked if I'd consider talking to my wife. I agreed to meet with her Thursday. Tuesday came, and I met with my lawyer. He asked me what I wanted. I told him the boys were my priority. I wanted to stay in their lives. But when I said I consider staying married for their sake, he shook his head. In my experience, that won't work. The marriage would be a facade, and it won't be good for the boys. We can arrange visitation if your wife agrees. He warned me about the financial side, noting that while our prenup was solid, some judges have ordered child support in cases like mine, given how long I've been in the boys' lives. Still, he felt confident we could negotiate terms that favored me. Before I left, my lawyer brought up the fee for his law partner, who specializes in family law and would be handling the divorce. He explained that the partner charges $15,000 up front. I couldn't help but feel frustrated. How does that even make sense? I'm the one who's been wronged here. My wife cheated, yet I'm the one expected to shell out this massive sum just to finalize the divorce. How is someone middle class like me supposed to afford that? The whole situation felt like an insult on top of injury. I didn't say much to my lawyer about it then, but the resentment was building. It just didn't seem fair. Turns out her ex hadn't abandoned them. He was in prison. He'd been released 3 years ago during a wave of non-violent offender releases. The lawyer suspected he might be back to his old ways, but didn't have concrete proof yet. Thursday arrived, and I sat down with my wife and father-in-law. I asked if they'd mind me recording the conversation to avoid any future misunderstandings. They agreed. Before we began, my wife asked to speak with me privately. Once we were alone, she started apologizing, but I cut her off. Before you say anything, know this. I know a lot more than you think. I asked how long the affair had been going on. She claimed it was just once. I played a short clip from the hidden camera showing her dusting the TV. Right near the camera she hadn't noticed. Her face fell. Finally, she admitted it started in March, almost immediately after he came back into their lives. I demanded no more lies. I confronted her about the family's secret. Her ex hadn't run off. He'd been in jail. She admitted she'd known, but swore they hadn't reconnected before February. When I revealed he'd been out for 3 years, her shocked expression told me she hadn't known. We brought my father-in-law back in and turned on the recorder. I asked if she had a lawyer. She didn't. I told her to get one because divorce was inevitable. Both she and her father asked if reconciliation was possible. No, I said firmly. We agreed the boys could see me anytime they wanted, as long as it was reasonable, and that she wouldn't interfere. I made it clear I'd provide for the boys at my discretion. She wouldn't receive anything directly from me. I'm exhausted, but I'm glad to be closing this chapter. The wounds she caused will take time to heal, but I hope the boys know I'll always be there for them.